In the dark corners of rural Maharashtra, a chilling story has begun to spread, one that feels more like a twisted fable than reality. A young boy, barely stepping into life's innocence, is said to have been killed by his own father. But here's where it becomes even more disturbing. To protect himself, the father reportedly staged the entire death as a leopard attack. Imagine the terror, an innocent life lost, and then a predator blamed for something it never did. A family secret buried beneath claw marks and fabricated screams in the night. If you're already unsettled, you should be, because this case is one of the most bizarre, haunting stories to emerge from Nanded, Maharashtra. Before we continue, a quick disclaimer. This video discusses a real-life case involving disturbing themes of violence and death. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to Black Thread Mysteries, the channel where we untangle stories that the world either forgot or was too afraid to tell. If you're drawn to mysteries that blur the line between reality and nightmare, you're in the right place. Now, let's step into the village life of Nanded, Maharashtra, where the story unfolded. It began with reports of a boy's mutilated body discovered near the outskirts of a settlement deep in the rural belt. At first glance, the injuries seemed consistent with a wild animal attack. After all, leopards are not strangers to these regions. Conflict between man and beast is an unfortunate reality here. Villagers whispered about a night of growls, the echo of panic, and then silence. The predator had struck, they thought, and another innocent life had been claimed by the forest. But something about this case was off. Too many details refused to align with the usual patterns of a leopard attack. The way the body was found, the suspicious behavior of certain family members, and the absence of clear evidence, pointing toward a wild animal, all these cracks in the narrative began to form, and soon the horrifying possibility emerged. Was the leopard just a scapegoat? This was no ordinary tragedy. It was a puzzle soaked in fear, betrayal, and deception. And as investigators pulled at the threads, the fabric of the truth began to unravel, revealing something no one in the village could have ever imagined. When the boy's body was first discovered, shock rippled through the village. Fear of leopards had always lurked in the minds of people living in rural Maharashtra, where forests and farmlands intersect. Farmers often spoke of seeing glowing eyes in the dark fields, hearing the bone-chilling growls that seemed to hover just beyond their huts. So when the child was found lifeless, the wounds carved across his body looked like confirmation of those fears. The leopard narrative seemed almost too easy, yet convincing enough in the first hours. Forest officials were among the first called in. They examined the boy's injuries and agreed, at least tentatively, that a leopard attack was possible. After all, there had been reports of big cat movement in the nearby areas. Villagers recalled spotting pug marks, and some even swore they had seen the predator roaming close to their grazing animals. Panic spread fast. Parents began keeping their children indoors after dusk, and rumors grew louder than reason. But as the investigation deepened, details started to unsettle the authorities. Experienced trackers noticed inconsistencies. The marks on the child's body didn't fully match the tearing and crushing injuries usually seen in leopard kills. There were no clear drag marks, no signs of a struggle in the dust, and oddly enough, no blood trail leading back into the forest. For a predator attack, the scene felt unnervingly clean. The police stepped in, balancing science with skepticism. At first, they didn't want to fuel fear among villagers by dismissing the leopard theory outright. But questions piled up. Why were the injuries so strangely placed? Why were there no convincing claw impressions around the site? Why did certain family members, especially the father, appear unusually calm for someone who had just lost a child in such a brutal way? The father himself repeated the story of a leopard attack with unnerving consistency. He told officers how he had woken to strange noises, how the predator had struck suddenly, and how helpless he had been to save his son. His words painted a picture of grief, but his eyes told another story. Investigators noted the absence of genuine shock in his demeanor. Villagers too began whispering, "Why does he not cry? Why does he not look broken?" Piece by piece, suspicion shifted away from the wild animal and onto the human heart of the tragedy. What if the leopard was nothing more than a carefully chosen disguise, a mask for something far more sinister? As investigators peeled back the layers of this tragedy, science began to whisper what human eyes had overlooked. The boy's body was sent for a post-mortem examination, and the report painted a story that clashed with the father's narrative. The injuries, though brutal, didn't fully align with the crushing force of a leopard's jaws or the tearing power of claws designed for survival. Instead, they bore marks more consistent with blunt force and deliberate staging. Forensic experts noted that the spacing of the wounds was irregular. A wild animal strikes in chaos, leaving behind frenzied patterns. Here, the wounds appeared almost controlled, deliberate, as if placed to mimic the expected outcome of a predator attack. Even more chilling was the absence of deep puncture wounds around the neck or skull, hallmarks of a leopard kill. Instead, there were signs of suffocation, subtle but undeniable. The truth was clawing its way to the surface. Meanwhile, investigators revisited the supposed crime scene. Soil samples showed no struggle, no disturbed earth that a thrashing child or pouncing predator would have left behind. There were no claw marks on nearby trees, no tufts of fur, no evidence of a predator dragging its prey back into the jungle. What they found instead were faint human footprints circling the site. Footprints that seemed to lead nowhere, as though someone had paced nervously before attempting to mislead. The villagers began to sense the unraveling of the tale. Their fear of a prowling leopard now clashed with the chilling suspicion that something far worse had happened within their community. Neighbors recalled the father's strange detachment, his too perfect retelling of events. Whispers grew into murmurs. Could he have done this himself? When police confronted the father with forensic inconsistencies, cracks began to show. He grew defensive, repeating his story as if rehearsed, clinging desperately to the image of a wild animal as the villain. Yet his inability to explain missing details, like why there were no drag marks, or how he managed to spot the leopard in the darkness, only tightened the noose of suspicion. In the quiet corridors of the investigation, one thought became unbearable. This wasn't a tragic encounter with nature's predator. It was something darker, something man-made. The leopard had not killed the child. Someone much closer had. Behind every crime lies a motive, sometimes clear as daylight, sometimes buried under layers of secrecy. In the Nanded case, investigators struggled to understand what could drive a father to harm his own child. Slowly, fragments of the family's private life began to surface, painting a picture of tension and resentment that had gone unnoticed in public view. The father, though outwardly calm, had been described by neighbors as short-tempered and withdrawn. Some spoke of financial struggles, debts piling up from failed harvests, and the mounting pressure of survival in a rural economy that left little room for error. Others hinted at domestic disputes, moments where frustration boiled over within the walls of their modest home. While the precise trigger remained clouded, the investigators sensed a volatile undercurrent, one that may have pushed him to the edge. What chilled authorities most was the calculated nature of the staging. This wasn't a crime of pure impulse. The placement of wounds, the consistency of the leopard story, and the timing of the supposed attack suggested planning. To fabricate such a story, the father had to count on fear. Fear of the wild, fear of predators that villagers already believed roamed nearby. By invoking the leopard, he weaponized superstition and local anxieties as a shield against suspicion. But deception has cracks. Villagers who once sympathized with him began to recall strange behavior. One neighbor remembered how the father had barely joined the frantic search when the boy was first reported missing. Another noticed that he spoke of the leopard before anyone else even mentioned the possibility. It was as though the script had been written in his mind long before tragedy struck. The idea of a parent harming their own child was unbearable for many. Even as the evidence mounted, some villagers resisted the possibility. No father would do this, they insisted. Yet the facts told a darker story. Human nature, they realized, could be far more dangerous than the wild animals they feared. Police pieced together the theory. The killing was not an accident. It was deliberate, born from rage or desperation, and the leopard was merely a mask to conceal it. The real predator had lived inside the home all along. The investigation was no longer about whether the father was guilty. It was about proving it beyond all doubt. And the walls of his fabricated story were closing in fast. The deeper the police dug, the shakier the father's story became. What had once sounded like a tragic encounter with nature now looked more like a desperate attempt at deception. Officers began pressing harder during interrogations, circling back to details he thought had gone unnoticed. Every time he repeated the same tale, word for word, the unnatural precision of his answers raised fresh doubts. Real trauma rarely sounds rehearsed, but his did. One glaring issue was time. The father claimed the leopard struck suddenly at night, dragging the boy away before anyone could react. Yet when investigators compared his timeline to the neighbors' accounts, they found mismatches. Villagers recalled hearing no screams, no growls, no panic, just silence until the father himself raised the alarm. For a predator attack, the quiet was deafening. Then came the forensic evidence. Experts presented the inconsistencies. No pug marks, no blood trail, no drag marks leading into the forest. If a leopard had truly attacked, it would have left behind chaos. Instead, the scene looked staged, almost sterile. The father struggled to counter these findings, often resorting to vague excuses, claiming the marks had been washed away by dew or that the predator was clever. His words rang hollow. As pressure mounted, officers began probing his personal life. Financial records hinted at debts, while neighbors spoke of simmering tempers at home. Though nothing provided a direct motive, the cracks in his emotional facade grew wider. He stopped meeting investigators' eyes. His voice faltered. At moments, he seemed cornered by the weight of his own lies. The village, once united in fear of a leopard, now turned its gaze on him. The whispers were no longer just whispers. Mothers who once mourned beside him began pulling their children away when he passed. Fathers shook their heads, muttering that he could never be as cruel as what humans were capable of. The community's suspicion became another layer of pressure he could no longer escape. For police, the case was reaching a critical moment. The evidence was damning, but without a confession or stronger forensic proof, it remained circumstantial. Yet, investigators sensed the truth hovering just beyond reach, waiting for the right push. They knew that if they pressed at the weakest points of his story, it would shatter completely. And soon enough, the breaking point arrived. The mask of the grieving father was beginning to slip, revealing something far darker beneath. By this point, the case had shifted from whispers to an unshakable suspicion. The leopard narrative, once a wall protecting the father, was crumbling under the weight of evidence. Investigators pressed harder, challenging every inconsistency. His answers became shorter, weaker, and filled with pauses that betrayed his once steady voice. When officers confronted him with the post-mortem report, proof that suffocation, not a predator's fangs, had caused the child's death, he had no response. The silence in the interrogation room was heavy, as though even the walls could feel the truth pressing in. He fumbled for explanations, but every attempt fell apart. For the first time, he looked cornered. It was then that the case turned from eerie suspicion into a chilling confrontation with reality. What would drive a father to such an act? Was it rage, despair, or something even more twisted? And here, dear viewers, I want to pause and ask you, what do you believe happened that night? Was this a premeditated crime, carefully staged to hide behind the fear of the wild? Or was it a sudden outburst, covered hastily with a story that couldn't survive the daylight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your theories are what fuel discussions in this community of mysteries. Back in Nanded, the pressure on the father intensified. Neighbors grew distant, police probed deeper, and the forest officials who had once entertained the leopard theory now admitted it no longer stood. Every shred of evidence pointed inward, toward the home, toward the man who had woven a predator out of thin air. The villagers who once dreaded the idea of a prowling leopard began dreading something worse. The thought that trust, family, and innocence could be betrayed so utterly by one of their own. Fear of nature turned into fear of human nature. The father, still clinging to fragments of his story, began to feel alter under round-the-clock questioning. Officers described him as restless, pacing, unable to maintain the mask of calm. The rehearsed lines that once sounded convincing now sounded mechanical, almost desperate. His performance as the grieving parent was collapsing. It was only a matter of time before the last layer of denial peeled away, exposing the raw truth he had tried to bury beneath a predator's shadow. The interrogation had dragged on for hours, each question circling closer to the truth. The father's rehearsed tale, once so confidently told, had been torn apart piece by piece. Investigators knew they were at the edge of a confession, but it would take one last push to break the wall he had built around himself. That push came when officers laid the evidence in front of him, all at once. The forensic report pointing to suffocation, the absence of claw or bite marks, the missing drag trail, the untouched soil, and the footprints that betrayed human presence rather than animal. They confronted him not with theories, but with undeniable facts. His silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of his shallow breathing. And then, in a low voice, almost inaudible at first, he began to speak. What came out shattered whatever fragments of sympathy remained. He admitted to killing his own son, though his explanation was wrapped in half-truths and excuses. He claimed it was an act of rage, triggered by a moment of uncontrollable anger. Some reports suggested financial stress and domestic discord may have played a role. Others hinted at a deeper psychological struggle that no one in the village had ever noticed. The most chilling part wasn't just the act itself, it was the methodical cover-up. After the killing, he deliberately inflicted wounds to mimic a leopard attack, relying on the community's fear of predators to shield himself from blame. He had counted on superstition and panic to work in his favor. In the darkness of night, he believed his lie would stand unchallenged. But under the relentless light of investigation, the truth had nowhere to hide. His confession confirmed what many had begun to fear. The leopard was never the villain. The true danger had been within the home, disguised as a parent, cloaked in the mask of grief. For the villagers, the revelation was devastating. It wasn't just the loss of a child. It was the betrayal of trust, the collapse of safety within the very bonds of family. What predator could ever compare to that? The confession turned the case from mystery into tragedy, but it also raised an even darker question. What drives a father to destroy his own blood and then weave a story so monstrous to conceal it? When the confession became public, the village of Nanded felt as if the ground beneath it had cracked open. For days, the fear of a prowling leopard had kept families awake at night, children locked indoors, and men standing guard outside with sticks and lanterns. But the revelation that the true predator was a father within their own walls struck far deeper than any imagined animal attack ever could. The shock turned into anger. Neighbors who had once pitied him now looked at him with disgust. Mothers whispered about betrayal, fathers cursed his name, and children were kept far from his sight. The thought of a parent harming their own child shattered the sense of trust that held the community together. For many, it was worse than death by an animal. It was a wound inflicted on the very spirit of family life. Authorities wasted no time moving the case into the legal system. The father was arrested, his confession documented, and the evidence carefully compiled into charges that could stand firm in court. The crime was classified as homicide, staged with intent to mislead. By attempting to disguise his act as a leopard attack, he had not only taken a life, but also exploited the fear of wildlife to manipulate his community. The court proceedings were expected to be complex, but the weight of the confession and forensic proof left little doubt about the eventual outcome. Legal experts debated the motives. Was it uncontrollable anger, financial despair, or a deeper mental instability? No answer could ever justify the brutality, but understanding the reason was essential for framing the punishment. The villagers followed every development closely. Many attended hearings, determined to see justice served not just for the boy, but for the community's peace of mind. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed he should face the harshest punishment possible, while others argued no sentence could ever match the gravity of taking one's own child's life. Beyond the legal walls, the tragedy left scars that would not heal. The Leopard, once feared as a lurking danger, was now seen almost as a victim of false blame. Villagers who had demanded action against the forest department now admitted they had been misled by a story born of human cruelty. In the end, the law could punish the father, but it could never erase the haunting truth that the greatest betrayal came not from nature's predator, but from the heart of a home. The courtroom drama was only one layer of the story. Behind the legal documents and forensic reports lay a darker question that experts struggled to answer. What drives a parent to such an unthinkable act? Psychologists and criminologists often describe these cases as cracks in the fragile wall of human control, where anger, despair, or untreated mental illness collide with vulnerability. In the Nanded tragedy, all signs pointed toward a mix of personal turmoil and calculated deception. The father's confession revealed a man who, rather than facing his failures or seeking help, chose violence against his own blood. But what unsettled investigators most was not just the act itself, it was the manipulation that followed. By fabricating a leopard attack, he exploited one of humanity's oldest fears, the predator in the dark. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a deliberate attempt to weaponize fear, to make his community doubt the wilderness instead of looking at the man among them. Psychologists explain that this type of behavior often comes from a deep disconnect with empathy. A parent is biologically wired to protect their offspring, yet in rare, chilling cases, that bond fractures under pressure. Stress, financial collapse, or hidden rage can corrode the very instinct that should prevent such harm. When that line breaks, what remains is a human predator, cloaked in ordinary life. For society, the story became more than just a crime. It became a mirror. The villagers realized how easily fear could blind them, how quickly they had believed the leopard tale without questioning its gaps. The tragedy exposed the danger of relying on myths and assumptions in the face of horror. It also raised awareness of how domestic violence and hidden anger often remain invisible until it is far too late. The case forced the community to reckon with uncomfortable truths. Sometimes the grayer test threats don't lurk in the forest, but inside the walls we trust most. And sometimes monsters don't roar in the night. They sit quietly at the family hearth, waiting for no one to suspect. The boy's death was no longer just an isolated tragedy. It had become a story of betrayal, psychology, and the terrifying realization that evil, when hidden behind a mask, can deceive even the sharpest eyes. As the chilling story from Nanded reaches its end, we are left staring into a darkness where truth and fear blend together. A father, bound by rage or perhaps desperation, took the life of his own son. Yet, instead of facing his crime, he sought shelter under the shadow of the wild. By blaming a leopard, he not only misled his community, but also tried to twist nature itself into an accomplice. But here lies the mystery that continues to haunt the region. For centuries, leopards have been both feared and respected in Maharashtra's rural landscapes. They appear in the fields at night, their glowing eyes a reminder that the wild is never too far away. When the boy's body was discovered, claw marks and wounds suggested something savage. But investigators quickly began to see patterns that no predator could explain. The evidence whispered of a human hand, deliberate and brutal. And yet, Within the community, rumors refuse to die. Some villagers still believe the leopard's presence is more than coincidence, that the wild animal might have played some role. Others argue that the father merely exploited local fears, knowing well that in villages, the cry of tiger or leopard can silence deeper questions. Was this only a desperate attempt to cover a murder? Or is there a chance the truth is even stranger than it appears? In the end, the boy's death left behind a broken family, a village torn between reason and superstition, and a chilling reminder of how fragile trust can be. A predator can hide in the shadows of the forest, but sometimes the most dangerous predator walks among us, hidden behind familiar faces. This is where the mystery lingers. Was the leopard only a scapegoat? Or will the wild forever hold secrets that humans cannot tame? If this story gripped you as much as it gripped us while uncovering it, don't forget to share your thoughts. Could the father's crime be so carefully staged that even experts struggled at first? Or do you believe the wild truly left its mark that night? Comment your theory below. I read every single one. And before you go, remember to like this video, share it with others who love unraveling the unknown, and subscribe to Black Thread Mysteries. Because the truth hides in the darkest corners, and together we shine the light.